Thanks for everybody for joining the call, and to Craig, Ben, and Rachel. Founded in 1972, the Business Roundtable is a nonprofit organization made up of CEOs from the U.S.'s leading companies. As major employers in every state, Business Roundtable CEOs take responsibility for creating quality jobs with good wages very seriously and works closely with communities, workers, and policymakers to build a better future for the nation and its people. Historically, the Business Roundtable statement of purpose indicated that corporations exist principally to serve their shareholders. However, today, they're really starting to realize that many Americans are struggling. Not enough has been done for workers to adjust to the rapid pace of change in the economy, acknowledging that the success of our system and economy is dependent on inclusive, long-term growth, and to more accurately describe the ways in which they endeavor to create value for all stakeholders. In June of 2019, Business Roundtable modernized their statement of purpose. A new statement of purpose reflects the desire to build long-term value by investing more in employees and communities with 5 key elements of focus: delivering value to customers, investing in employees, dealing fairly and ethically with suppliers, supporting the communities in which they work, and generating long-term value for shareholders. In today's panel, we're going to talk more about timing as well as action and best practices companies can take to make this promise a reality. So joining me today, we've got, as you heard, Ben Eubanks, Craig Weiss, and Rachel Light. And I just want to open this up, and I'll tee this off by just moving left to right. So Ben, what's your understanding of why the Business Roundtable made this change? What does it mean in practice? And are we on the right path?
So one of the interesting things that I've actually kind of run across in doing some research around this topic is there's actually data that show over time, as we have these periods of longer prosperity, and the U.S. for a long time, despite what the stock market's doing today, has had a lot of prosperity for a long period of time. And so employees and workers in those times of prosperity start to look for ways to use that leverage they have to push back and get more benefits to themselves or try to create better working conditions. And what's really interesting about this is for a long time in the world we live in, that came in the form of like labor unions and things like that. And today we're seeing the rise of employee advocacy, where people are kind of standing up for the social issues, the equity issues, things they feel strongly about, whether they're actually related to the business's work or not. And so it's been very intriguing to kind of see that. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the data in terms of why now.
Okay, I didn't know. I thought Jeff was going to say Craig. Excuse me. I think why now? I'll be a little bit sort of on the difference with Ben here. Is I think that we are in the on the precipice of I believe a global recession regarding the virus, and as a result, now is more than ever than initially when the statement was done, because you're going to have a higher amount of remote workers, which means that the opportunities for, say, an online learning could be maximized so that you're enabling them to do and help them grow with a variety of different skill sets. There's plenty of research that also backs up the necessities of personal and professional development to retain employees. And as the virus kind of morphs and goes through in terms of from an economic impact here in the United States, it is going to disrupt clearly manufacturing. So there has to be some modifications and changes in terms of how best to serve your employees going forward in terms of this, next stage of business.
Yeah, that makes sense. In fact, I know that what we're seeing at Cornerstone, like right now, as many companies are doing, is we're actually engaging right now in a stress test across the business, where everybody across the entire company globally is working from home for 3 days, so we can start to see where there are gaps in the system. So truly a unique time. Thanks, Craig. Rachel, thoughts?
Just that the nature of work is changing. We've got between 4 to 5 different generations in the workforce, and making sure that these different types of employees who have different objectives out of what they're going to get out of work and out of the experience of work, we need to make sure that we're catering to all of them. and it's no longer a one-size-fits-all opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. No, that makes a lot of sense. We're seeing a lot of change in business, and one of the things that we've looked at, in fact, a book that I've read now a number of times is a book by Tom Friedman called "Thank You for Being Late." And in that, what he really does is argues significantly around just this pace of change and how rapidly the world is changing. And to Craig's point, one of the interesting things is that with this pandemic, it's created, this need to reinforce one of the things that Friedman talked about, which was the ability to sort of build change resiliency. So as we turn to this next question, I'm going to come to you first, Craig. I've seen you speak before. I know and appreciate your perspective. Curious on, your view on where companies really should be focusing their efforts when it comes to employees. And I know that you have a personal interest and passion in really looking at the world around upskilling and reskilling. So curious on your thoughts. Where should organizations be putting their effort?
Thank you, Jeff. I think organizations should focus on reskilling. I think there's too much, understandably, about skill development and upskilling and whatnot. But to me, reskilling is sort of this hidden point, and you're dealing with, regardless of the age brackets. There's certain industries, mining, oil and gas, some parts of manufacturing. Part of it's dealing with automation, which is going to take place more and more over the next decade. Part of it is, with the climate as companies move and consumers want these different kind of changes to be applicable into the workforce. You need to have the reskilling in terms of, okay, here's somebody, they've always done this job, now that job is disappearing, here comes a new job, and they're going to need those skills for it, so they're going to have to be reskilled up. And I think that as a whole, and here we're talking about the United States, we do a very poor job about reskilling. We make a good point about, yes, we're in favor of it, we're going to do all these kind of things, and then when it comes down to hitting the road, it doesn't really happen. And I believe that it is the responsibility, dual sides. One, obviously, the state and the government should be playing a better kind of role in this, but the organizations have, I believe, a responsibility to ensure that their workforce is not being pushed out and sort of just left on the unemployment line or being told, look, you need to develop these new skills, rather than helping them, provide them the skill opportunities of reskilling them and tweaking out as a result of it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. A lot of people are talking about how automation is really coming, and the computers and the robots are coming to take over the world. I'm curious, Ben or Rachel, any thoughts on what skills specifically? As we talk about reskilling and upskilling, that becomes a really large question because there's so many areas we can go. In fact, I was reading in Inc.com recently that they're arguing that the 5 skills people really need to focus on are things like problem solving, things like time management, decisiveness, empathy, compassion. Friedman talks about things like change resilience. Other people are talking about things like, rather than focusing on leadership, starting to focus on followership. Thoughts on where we need to be upskilling or reskilling? Ben or Rachel or Craig, anybody?
Rachel, you want to shoot first?
What's really coming to mind for me is the fact that onboarding has always been the most expensive way that companies spend their money. So just from getting employees in the door and getting them the skills they need to do their job, even prior to upskilling them, that's where we're losing money. So we need to ensure that we keep the employees that we have. We need to ensure that we're giving them the skill sets they have. And Ben, I'll let you speak to some more of the specific skills that Jeff's talking about.
Okay, absolutely.
Hang on, Ben, real quick. Let me just go back to Rachel real quick, because one of the things that we've seen, and in fact, if people out there have read some of the work by Burson, one of the things that Josh has spoken about over time, if you read his sort of annual State of the World thing, is that we used to focus on employee engagement. And that was a big term. And a couple of years ago, he really pivoted more into the world of employee experience. And so, Rachel, I know one of the things that you've done at Cornerstone is build out a fantastic onboarding program. Can you talk more to why experience is so critical and what that means? And have you seen any examples that we've used to sort of build that experiential mindset? And I'm going to come right back to Ben.
Well, more than anything, we're looking for opportunities for employees to feel connected to something bigger than themselves. You know, these days with such a competitive landscape of businesses that you can go to work for that offer various interesting and sexy perks, we're finding that it's hard to leave yourself at the door when you enter your workspace. And so you need to be a part of something bigger than that, something that makes you feel like a better human because you've joined forces with it. And so the expectation from the employees is that every part of them and the values that they have and the person that they desire to be are being explored within their work. And they're able to develop these skills that they were curious about that are not only going to make them better as a manager, but also better as a person.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. One of the things that we do here, and I hear a lot of different folks communicating around the need to bring our whole self to work, especially as you look at things like how prolific and sort of ubiquitous diversity and inclusion is, and that question around how do we bring our whole self to work. But let me come back to Ben. I promised Ben I'd come back to him. Skills, upskilling, reskilling. Like, where should we be focusing?
So one of the interesting things that I found when I was writing my book, doing all this research around this wave of AI and automation and whatever you want to call it, right? Machine learning, it doesn't matter. Let's just say automation as a whole and disruption. As that wave passes by, what do the jobs look like that are left behind? And what's happened every time through history, whenever right now it's digital automation, obviously, but in the past, mechanical automation, right? Any kind of automation, the jobs left behind are more human in design because we're automating away those things that are less human, right, as they are right now. One of the examples, so for everybody that's listening to this, take 10 seconds and think about a part of your job that if you could push a button right now on your desk and never have to do that part of your job again, you'd push that button and get rid of it. And when I ask people that question, a lot of the things they say are like checking my email and managing my calendar and scheduling these things, right? Or having to do these tasks that are pretty routine and repetitive, and honestly, they're kind of mind-numbing and very robotic in nature. And so those are the kind of things that are the first to get automated in the kind of work that we do, typically as knowledge workers. And the kind of skills that are left behind then are more human focused. So the list, the human skills model that we've developed echoes a lot of those you're mentioning earlier from the Inc. piece, Jeff. So compassion, right? Really caring and being considerate and connecting with other people. Collaboration, not just querying a database. We can all Google anything we want to, but really collaborating and working together with others. Curiosity, creativity, those are the key skills that we're watching very closely. And a lot of the research that's coming out over time has been fun to see. Since that model was built a couple years ago, the new research that keeps coming out actually echoes and supports those things, right? Like Harvard's new research says that if you're more curious, you're less likely to be biased and accept stereotypes because you push back on those. So it's neat to see as this automation continues to advance the types of skills. And I definitely agree with you. Well, we need technical skills. People need to do their jobs, but long term, that adaptability and those other soft skills are going to be critical.
Jeff, can I add?
Yep, beautiful. I was going to open it up.
Okay. I think there's 2 points here that are being missed. First of all, I think what I see from a trend-wise experience is something we do every single day. I mean, we have an experience that we tripped over a curb looking at our smartphone, right? That's an experience from a learning standpoint. So I have a difference of opinion in terms of that. The second thing is I think that research tends to focus more in terms of white collar. And what we should be looking at is those blue collar roles, right? I'm in a I'm doing pick and pack. That's my job every single day. It's just pick and pack. And how do we tap into providing those individuals with different opportunities? I think we focus too much in terms of job role and less on skills, because we tap in, okay, you need these skills to do this job. If I'm a company and all I'm focusing on for my training and learning is compliance and regulatory, I can already tell you, yes, people are going to do it, but are they really gaining any skill sets? The answer is absolutely not. If you're that kind of personality, these different types of things that you have. There are plenty of people that just are happy being worker bees. And so when you're talking about advancing and doing all these kind of things, they may not want to, right? We're not robots ourselves. And so you have to be cognizant of that fact, and you have to be cognizant of somebody that's doing a warehouse role, or a role that may be part-time or seasonal, or even on a union. You have to be cognizant that the skills that they're looking to do may be quite different than somebody who is sitting in an office every day, or right now working remote. And I think that's a challenge as we move forward in doing that. And Ben talked about automation going through. Well, the automation in the car industry, auto industry, is clear as day for everybody, right? I mean, there was the whole kind of impact, obviously, in 2008. There was a continuous impact with more and more of those individuals losing their job. And even if you bring them back, there is still a tap into level of automation that will go forward. And so I think we need to just not look only at the white-collar worker, but really focus a lot, because there's always going to be opportunities for the white-collar worker, because that's kind of where we gear our learning and development. But we need to also be cognizant, if you have blue-collar positions, that these people need the same level of love and compassion and empathy and upskilling and all these other things that these other people do. Thank you.
No, I appreciate it. And by the way, everybody just chime in as needed. I appreciate your point, Craig. So I'll just play sort of point counterpoint. So a lot of the research that I've been reading, first of all, I agree with you, by the way. A lot of the reading I've been looking at suggests that somewhere between globally 400 to 800 million jobs by 2030, which frighteningly now is not so far away, are going to potentially be displaced by automation. We're seeing globally, but more in the U.S., a rise in things like virtual reality, augmented reality, being able to ship some of those tools out. In fact, I myself went through a demo where I guess was the virtual reality blue-collar worker, where I was having to adjust mechanics on a truck, and if I made a mistake, it would explode. So where I guess I'm going and opening up to anybody is, if they're right, if so many of these blue-collar jobs are going to be subject to automation, what's our obligation as companies then, if those are the positions that are going to be most likely to be impacted by automation? Any ideas on where we should focus on upskilling and reskilling, mainly because the majority of things that I read, including the ink piece and including what Ben was suggesting earlier, and maybe Ben, I'll take this right to you first, and Ben and Rachel, is if most of the focus of skill development is going to be on the soft skills, compassion, empathy, et cetera, what's our obligation to those blue-collar workers? Where should we be developing them?
So the short answer for that one is the focus for them should be around adaptability, right? Being able to be, trying to think of another word besides adaptable, right? Being able to survive those changes as they come, because if they are of the mindset, I am going to keep doing what I've always been doing, and I'm going to put my blinders on or put my head in the sand and never look up from that, then they're going to be impacted by that ultimately. And no matter how much money the company pours into development or how much the government wants to support that through other resources, if that person doesn't decide that they want to advance their skills, they're not going to. I was talking to someone works for a government agency. They were doing some hiring and moving some people around, and they actually moved a business unit to another area and told everyone, we will pay for full reload. We'll move you over there if you want to move to that new location. And the people in that office overwhelmingly said, I don't feel like I'm competitive for the job that I'm even doing right now. I can't apply for that job because I can't compete with people in the market because I haven't kept up my skills, right? That's a scary place to be, to imagine that as an individual. But one other point I want to point out here we're talking about this from a business perspective, the leadership level. If you are in charge of talent and HR, I am always an advocate of you need to know the skills, the capabilities of your people inside the business, because a lot of companies don't have that clarity down to the individual level of what their people can do. You need to have that clarity around the skills of your people, just like your finance guys with their spreadsheets, right? They can tell you where every nickel is in the organization, every office chair. We should know with the same level of capability what the skills are and competencies are down to each individual worker, so we can make sure that we're keeping them up to speed and making the best use of what they have to bring to the table.
Fantastic.
Ben, I think that both of your points are really spot on. And I think that learning can even look different. I think that learning these days in terms of providing the skills that employees need in order to seek out other opportunities throughout an organization or to even learn what's going on throughout the business would be adapting the gig economy to the workplace and allowing people to almost do internal internships where they're working on various projects within different departments and starting to understand what kind of skills they might need and what kind of skills they're able to develop in order to be successful on that project and in assisting that department.
And can I
love it and agree that. Go ahead, Greg. Yep.
Yeah, I apologize. I think there's three things. I'd like to give an actual true story dealing with a blue-collar worker. And this was a woman. I agree with Ben first. All companies in learning and development, HR training, whatever, you should already have done skill gap analysis when you rolled into that company or when you started working. I mean, that is something I did at every company I worked at when I ran training. And the other thing is that I had there was an employee, male clerk, high school graduate, and we provided not only proprietary-based learning content, but we also provided personal and professional development. And I remember she came to my office the next day and she was crying. And I asked her why she was crying. And it was tears of happiness, really. She was so appreciative that she got the opportunity to take a variety of different personal and professional, right? Things that, A, she was interested in, and B, stuff that she was unable to take because she could not afford to go to a community college or go somewhere like this and be able to take all these different types of courses and whatnot of information that she just wanted to learn. Had nothing about being a mail clerk, had nothing to do with, she wanted to be a supervisor, she didn't. And then she also told me that because, most people access and learning out of the workplace, that her boyfriend got on and he was picking out things to learn. And same thing, high school graduate, never going to go to college, couldn't afford to. And I think that is something that really hits home more so. And it gets back to, you can upskill somebody as much as you want to, but everybody knows in organizations, if your boss doesn't like that person's not going anywhere. If you're, the boss likes you, but the higher boss doesn't like you, that doesn't go anywhere. There's, too many things of saying, well, they can go and apply for this job. I worked at companies where you can't apply for another job in another department because there's like a department, they don't like each other, or they don't want you to leave because you're A-star talent. Why would I want to give up my A-star talent to go somewhere else within the company up there? I mean, so there's all those kind of nuances that take place in any size company, regardless of size. And thus, the way you're gonna retain information, we talk too much about comprehension and retention. Those are kind of understandable. Synthesis is what you want, which is where you acquire that skill or that knowledge, and then you build upon that. And this is why I'm a big believer of, if I'm interested in something, I'm going to retain, I'm going to learn it more, and I'm going to comprehend and synthesize it way more than if I don't have an interest in that. And this is where I think organizations and companies can really leverage that and tap into those kind of pieces and not just say, look, it's going to improve you to get another job. I may not want another job. I could be happy doing this for the rest of my life. So you have to understand your employee. You have to sort of get into their head and thinking, because A, everybody is motivated by different things, and B, there's different gaps that somebody could acquire or want to or has an interest into it, and that's the key the key focus that should take place, rather than just saying, "Well, I'm going to, upskill you so that you can have, a better job role or a better job experience."
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So to anybody really at this point, what I've heard so far, and I agree with by and large everything that's been said, is what I've heard is it's a government's obligation to invest in employees. It's a company's obligation to invest in employees. We've got skill gaps. We need to do skill analysis. We're looking to change resilience, compassion. The two people I haven't heard us talk about yet, and I'd be curious to see your answers both on this question as well as then how it connects to the organizational responsibility. And it's an ongoing discussion. Is it the manager's responsibility to invest in the employee? Is it the employee's responsibility to argue for it? How do organizations create that climate where managers are, whether it's incentivized, whether it's forced, et cetera, to really be doing what Craig mentioned? If you run L&D or if you're in a manager role, being able to do ongoing skill gap analysis, especially as skills are changing. For example, we've got a lot of HR folks on this webinar. Where do they start? Where should they? If we're going to give people a sort of a punch list of things that they need to start, where's the manager's responsibility? Where's the employee's responsibility? How do we build a culture of learning, whether it's blue collar or white collar, any collar? Anyone? Ben, Rachel, first, I'll kick it off to you guys.
I was going to say, I've got a quick story to share that kind of illustrates how one company does that really well. So Tata Consultancy Services is a huge business consulting firm, and one of the things that they require you to do as an employee is to tell your leaders what you want to do. Well, I guess they require the managers to have the conversation, right? And every time you get together with your manager, in that conversation, somewhere within, they talk to you about, okay, what do you want to do next? It doesn't matter if you've been there for a month or for 10 years. They are always asking that question because they know if I don't get you thinking about a career here, you'll think about a career somewhere else when the recruiter calls you from the competition. So they're trying to embed that in every conversation. And what's interesting is they believe in that so wholeheartedly that the CEO, the COO, and the CTO, arguably three of the most important people in the organization, all started as trainees years ago and moved up through the organization because they prioritized that movement internally and those frank conversations all the time. A lot of companies, you mentioned a minute ago, how to do an actual culture of this, and a lot of times managers are scared to have these conversations. They're not sure how to have the conversations. They're worried about losing, as Craig said a minute ago, that A player, that amazing person. They don't want to lose that person in the organization. But if you're holding tight to them, the research from I4CP says they call those people talent hoarders. And those managers that are talent hoarders that hold on to everybody end up losing them anyway, but they don't lose them to another manager internally. They lose them outside the business. And that's a loss for everybody inside. So anyway, there's a story. I'd love to tell that one though, because it really illustrates what it looks like from a very functional perspective, practical. If you want a thing to start this week, if you want to start making an impact there, start having managers have those conversations with their people and tell them not to be afraid about what someone says. Just be aware of that. Be in a loop on what they want to do, what they want to be, because then you can start supporting them in those endeavors long term.
I would even advise
Rachel,
a step. Yeah, sorry, hopefully you can hear me better. I'm sorry, my sound has been off a bit. I would advise that a step before that would be to make sure that your managers are well trained. And the reason that employees leave companies faster than anything else is because they don't have a good manager. And I do believe that at times that's the fault of the company for not giving those managers enough of the appropriate tools and enough of a well-rounded education at what it takes to be a manager, what it takes to show up for their team, what it takes to identify when an employee is having a tough time, and when they're motivated. Whatever that is, they need to know so that they can really help them be successful.
No, that makes sense. And in fact, Ben, to one of your comments earlier, one of the things that we actually, rolled out in our annual, in our review process was about a 4 or 5 question inventory that we asked every employee to complete. So as they get ready for their review, it asks them, where do you want to focus more? Do you want to get better at what you're doing now? Do you want to grow? Do you want to do something different? So appreciate the perspectives. I want to pivot to the next slide and just ask that there's been a lot of content that we've covered here. There we go. What happens if we don't do all of this? And we're talking, there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of different ideas that are going on around here. But if we're not laser focused on meeting employee needs, again, blue collar, white collar, anything, what are the risks? Are companies at risk of going out of business? What's your perspectives on if we don't do this?
Can I jump first?
Anybody? Yep, go for it.
No. Oh, okay. I think if you look at it from a longitudinal standpoint of looking at a variety of companies that do not invest in employees, do not buy in and really gain the interest, I think you have to look at it from two sides. One, you have to look at it from pre-2000, 2000 to 2010, right, and 10 to 20 here, because times change and reflect that. I don't think companies go out of business. But what I do think is that as whatever industry you're in, it becomes highly competitive in terms of people, and Ben made it right about dealing with talent hoarders, is that people will leave and they'll go to another company. And the premise that I'm going to go to another company that's, more innovative or something, that does play an enormous role versus something that very kind of, when you think of manufacturing, I don't think anybody thinks of, no offense to manufacturing companies, but it never comes across where somebody's like jumping for joy to be like, hey, I'm going to go work at a manufacturing company. There's sort of this connotation involved versus, hey, I'm going to work at a tech company, right? There's a different perception that is there. And this is where I think the risk comes in if you're not going to act on doing this. And, part of it actually comes in, I know we have lots of people on HR here today, but you have to have that buy-in as well. And you have to be pushing as a proponent or being willing to push back on C-level or whatever in terms of the management. And all those people, if they're not satisfied, they're going to leave and they're going to go elsewhere. And again, the data backs in terms of the personal and professional development is a key component for them leaving. And so you're going to get a talent train, then you're going to replace it with a younger audience. Now we're at Gen Z, and you're going to think, well, this is going to be perfect. It could be just plug holes. It doesn't work that way, right? They have different modalities in terms of where they think they should be in terms of their experience versus people that are at a much older level. So that's where I see that the impact takes, because we are in a global marketplace. You're no longer just in the United States, or you're no longer just in England or something. It's a global marketplace, and so people will steal talent and have no problem in doing so. And so you're going to lose that innovation, and it's very hard, especially in today's economy, to get back that innovation when those people are, splintering and you're bleeding talent.
Thanks. Ben, Rachel? I know, Rachel, you drive global employee experience, so thoughts?
Completely. To add to that, I would say that we live in an environment where frustrated people take their frustration to social media and to any field that they can to feel like they're being seen. So the moment you have a frustrated employee leave your organization, they are more likely to blast your company and say all the terrible things that they didn't like, even if it was momentary, even if it was just in those last few weeks of leaving. They will be very quick to want to express that somewhere. And that really destroys companies' opportunity for getting good talent and the best talent. And it makes it difficult to be competitive if you're not showing up, even for your employees who might not have an opportunity at your organization anymore.
And that's a great point. I think somebody else, was that you, Ben?
Yes, I was like marveling at the you become the headline, basically, right, Rachel? If you are not doing the right things, you become the next headline, and no employer wants that.
Completely.
Yeah. So, Rachel, actually, I have a question I'd love to come back to you with, because as someone that's been driving employee experience for a while, let's just say that, which I'm sure we do, so we've got a number of people on the phone. Let's say that somebody hasn't really started to do this yet, and they haven't looked at really understanding employee experience and how to build, whether it's programs or whether it's just an event, et cetera. Where would you recommend that people start? What's been successful for you at Cornerstone? Can you lay some wisdom on people?
Happy to. I would say the best place to start with anything employee experience or engagement-wise is in the same vein as knowing your employee skills, also knowing your employees as people and asking them what they want. We've had a great deal of success when our programs aren't driven by HR or aren't driven by our leadership teams, but they're actually driven by our employees. By creating an environment where someone can tell you what they're interested in and what they'd love to see happen at your office or just in your virtual field, and giving them the tools to make that become a reality for everyone else, not only makes them feel seen, but also it turns out it resonates with a lot of the rest of your population as well. And so just creating the space for that and understanding that it's okay to redirect them a bit if what they're proposing doesn't exactly resonate with your mission or your values, that there are ways that you can tweak things and really make them work for the organization while the employee continues to feel like they created it. And often from there, we'll drive it and have a lot more passion about it than perhaps something you would have created for them and ask them to join in on.
Can you give any specific examples of what's been done? And I know that you and I work together, and I've got a couple things in mind. But any examples that people can sort of say, "Oh, I hadn't thought about something like that."
Sure. We get a lot of requests for mentorship programs. It feels like employees that are struggling often feel like the answer to their struggle would be to have a mentor. And the problem that I've encountered with that is that mentorships are only as good as the mentors involved and only as good as their availability and their interest in actually contributing to the development of the person that they're mentoring. And so we took a softer approach to that and developed something called shadow sessions. It was brought to my attention by an entry-level employee who really wanted to feel like he had access to people on the leadership team and wanted to start developing a program for his team specifically. And rather than limiting it to that, we developed a global program that allowed employees to request an hour every quarter, essentially, with various leaders. And we checked in with those leaders. We matched them up based on availability. And the expectation was only that they would meet with them for 1 hour. And if it turned into something grander than that, if an actual mentorship formed from that, then that was great. If there wasn't a click, there was no expectation beyond that. And we've had an incredible amount of success with that. Over 100 mentorships have formed from that over the last 3 years. And employees have met with over 400 different leaders that they feel passionately they now know more about the organization. We find that employees that have participated in this way have stayed with the organization and have moved throughout, continuing to get promoted because they see the various opportunities and they feel inspired about what's available to them.
And the cost for that whole program was?
$0. Time, though. I mean, it does take
Craig,
time.
yeah, it's time, but Craig, I get you. Craig, Ben, any best practices?
Yeah, sure.
I am, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Two words come to mind here that are I think critical to this. The first is transparency, being clear. Rachel mentioned earlier doing something that is a little bit farther down the line in terms of maturity, like opening up gig opportunities for your employees to be able to chime in and opt in to other opportunities that might allow them to use their strengths and the things that they're most excited about using, those skills that they're really proud of. The way that I kind of look at that conversation is think about how it felt when someone handed you an offer for the job you're doing now. It felt probably pretty good. It feels nice to be wanted. Well, that kind of opportunity there where you have an internal marketplace, even if it's very informal, very, very low tech, if it's just you put something together there, those people that had a chance to opt in and let someone say, hey, I need Craig because he's really great at data analysis. I need 5 hours of that a week. I can tap Craig on the shoulder and he'll come and help me. Craig also feels the benefit of that. He feels wanted and desired all over again. So I think that piece of it, the transparency and being able to see those opportunities internally, I think is important. The other part, though, that ties in, and I don't think any of us have really talked about this specifically, but the idea of purpose and understanding the big picture of what you're doing. I might be, on an assembly line and turning this one bolt to make this widget, but at the end of the day, is that device, that end product going on to save lives, is that having some bigger impact on the world? And how can an employer connect that person and the work they're doing to that bigger picture and what they're doing there? My favorite behavioral scientist is Dan Ariely, and his research shows that if you have people that are connected to that bigger purpose and they understand the impact of the work they're doing, they are twice as productive. And for all the numbers we see around productivity and the lack of improvement there over the last few years, to imagine that our people could be as much as twice as productive if we just take the time to connect them to the purpose, the bigger picture of what we're doing, I think those are really powerful.
Great. Craig?
I agree and with Ben in terms of you have to have purpose. And the way I always look at it is it's better to go with an approach called impact of learning, which is where it's tied to the company's goals or values, objectives for that year. That kind of ties into a purpose. But again, if I'm doing like the widget example, tying into the purpose, my purpose isn't necessarily, you have to remember, everybody thinks that everybody's thinking about the company. Let's be realistic. A lot of people are just thinking about the paycheck, right? They need that paycheck. And in, gig economy here in California, now they're being defined as employees, so there's other pieces involved here. But that may be what they're looking at. And so you have to have that understanding about the real world. So A is that the company, you want them to be happy, obviously, and et cetera, but also understand that employee, what challenges they're facing outside of the workplace, with obviously understanding PPI, or PII, PPI, and, without sort of tampering into many things, but to get a better understanding on who is that person, what challenges are they facing. If I'm having to have two jobs, my purpose is obviously taking care of my family or whatever it might be. And so companies have to have, I think, better empathy in terms of with their employees and making it where they truly care about them. I'm not saying that people don't, but at the end of the day, it's dealing with the bottom line and truly care about those people in order to say, look, we are a family and we want to adhere to it. I think one of the best stories I can tap in is, I won't mention who the company I work for, is an F-50. And we went into this giant room, and it had all those books, Who Moved My Cheese and everything around the thing. And so when we started talking, it turned out, I reported to the COO, it turned out that the books were being provided to all the employees. Managers never read it. The people in the room never read it. They didn't know. There were plenty of managers didn't know one thing about their employee out of the workplace, those kind of things. And that all taps into sort of this philosophy, well, if you don't care about me as a person, then why should I care about you as a company?
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I know that we're coming up sort of on time. I want to move to my last question. Because I'm sure there's a lot of questions from the group. Again, one of the challenges that many companies are experiencing right now is equipping managers with those skills that are so hard to measure. Things like empathy, things like, what Carl Rogers, the psychologist years ago, termed unconditional positive regard, which just means regardless of what's happening in your life, I hold you in ideal esteem, so I'm here and I'm available for you. It becomes a really unique challenge for a lot of people in HR to sort of build the culture, the way we work, so we do engage in all of these things. So with that, I'm going to pivot to the last question. We're just going to spend a couple of minutes here, then we'll open it up for questions. So we've covered quite a bit of ground. What does success look like from each of your perspectives? I'm going to go we're just going to go right to left. I'm going to go Rachel, then Craig, then Ben. How do we know, as people, that whether you're in the HR space, whether you're a CEO, whether you're a COO, as we're looking at engaging people, upskilling people, investing in the employees, knowing that things like measuring the ROI on learning is so challenging and measuring the experience is so difficult to quantify, what are some ideas you have in how do we know that we've arrived? Rachel?
Well, in addition to retention being quite key to understanding that our programs are working, I think employee enthusiasm and seeing that employees are driving programming and driving experiences and wanting to be involved and directing things and asking for new challenges seems to be a real sign of success throughout the organization. Also, the fact when employees start bringing in their colleagues from outside of the business and trying to get them recruited into your business means that they feel really passionately. And we continue to send out engagement surveys that ask our teams if they would recommend the company to friends and family. And those results are really key to understanding how they feel about what we're doing and what we're creating for them.
Great, thanks. Craig?
I equally believe it's empowering your employees to get more involved in the company and to really communicate more effectively with them and asking them, where do you want to be in a year? Where do you want to be in 6 months? What do you want to learn? What are you interested in learning? And then for folks who, well, I don't know, which is a common answer, is to say, well, what are you interested in? And building that sort of rapport with them. I think the biggest challenge, though, the unknown, is that we're basing this on something that's non-related today to the virus, to the pandemic. And that's not going to be the way it is here for the coming years. So some of these things are going to change because you're dealing with remote workers. More and more are going to do that, have their workers at home. So as a result, the new challenge becomes, okay, I can't call you into my cube. The manager may be doing a variety of other things. They're on calls all day. So how does this kind of play in? And to me, I think the success will be that whether you're doing online learning or, here you're going to have to get into, if you're not into the online learning angle, you're going to have to jump into it. You're going to have to do more kind of webinars that can be recorded and then shared with people, more online content, because the workers are not going to be going in. You're not going to have a crowd of people, sitting in an instructor-led training session anymore, at least for the coming year. So all these things have to come into play when you're deciding on, how do we define success? Success is saying, look, they're going to want to stay with the company when this gets through, and you're, assuring them that there's still going to be a job for them come the year. I know that's kind of hard to do because of the economy and the recession that will take place, but these are all kind of factors that tap in, which, is both building on that success, and then that unknown challenge is the unknown variables we don't know at this time, dealing with the massive impact of the pandemic with individual companies.
Thanks, Craig. Ben?
So one of the words that Rachel used was retention, and if you're looking for some sort of metric, I want to tell a quick story to kind of illustrate that from one company that has used some of the things that we're talking about here. They're focusing on their employees, and it has helped the bottom line as a positive kind of result of that. But Chipotle is a fast casual Mexican chain, restaurant chain, and they a couple years ago were facing this issue where about half of their store managers were turning over. And if you've never worked in the food service space or the retail space, the manager is the one that sets the shifts for the workers. They order the inventory, they handle the training. They are in charge of almost all the logistics inside that location. And so for those people to turn over, it was costing them tons and tons of money. And so they made this decision overnight and said, okay, from now, this point forward, we will never do this thing again. And it changed everything. Their turnover dropped by half for the store managers, and they started seeing all these positive customer satisfaction scores, things like that. And the one change they made was they said, we will never hire a store manager for one of our locations that is not a current employee. So you can only be a manager of a Chipotle if you have worked there in some other capacity before moving up to a management role. And one of the things they do to encourage that is they actually provide bonuses to other leaders in the business that develop people into new leaders. So it's not just a thing they leave to chance and they hope that it's going to work out, but they actually incentivize other leaders in the business to grow someone up. If I'm teaching Jeff, Jeff's the guacamole scooper, but one day he wants to be a leader of people in the business, I can start teaching him and growing him and mentoring him, which Rachel talked about a minute ago. And as he becomes more competent and is able to take that role on, I get that incentive, that benefit, that bonus. And so one of the other positive things there is for those leaders in your business, and you can probably, if you close your eyes right now and think about them, those leaders that are already naturally inclined to be great at giving feedback and supporting people and helping them with their career mobility, those leaders are going to get rewarded for those behaviors that they're already doing. And the leaders that don't prioritize that, they'll see others and want to join in. So that's an example of seeing a positive impact, not just in keeping the people that you want to keep, those people that are committed and motivated, but also seeing impacts to the bottom line, which takes us back to the first part of this conversation, right? The bottom line is important, but that's not the only thing we should be looking at. Let's put the people first if we can, and the rest of the business will follow.
So before I pass this back off to Mary Fran to field the questions, I know we went a little over, Mary Fran, a couple things that I've heard just to help give some people some takeaways, which is sort of one, know where you're trying to go. Set a North Star. Identify what metrics are going to be important to you from, one of the things that we heard right now was retention. Other things I heard our panelists talk about was having a compelling why behind, a purpose that people are having at work. And also reaching out and asking people what they want. But also the piece that I just want to remind the group about is if you're going to ask, there's two other pieces that you have to do. One is listen, and then the third is act. So before we move this on to questions and I pass this off to Mary Fran, I really want to thank Ben and Craig and Rachel for your insight. And with that, I think I pass this back to you, Mary Fran.
Thank you, Jeff. It's so engaging listening to all of you today. I want to remind our webcast viewers that they can submit a question at any time, and even if I don't get to you today, we will pass them on to our speakers. So I know I just heard you all talk about what success looks like, how we all believe people should be purposeful, motivated to learn in their work to produce value for themselves and for their organization. But in a climate of constant change where the work itself is always shifting, how does something like a threat of automation change a focus from the employee and their skills and their level of commitment and purpose? How does it change the conversation around that? How do you help with that when suddenly the skills they need are altered in light of a new context produced by automation?
Anyone? I can jump in. I'll just tee this one up. So part of what you're talking about has to do with how people approach tasks and what the organization is also doing to enable and prepare people to actually be able to step in and develop themselves. So, right now with how fast things continue to be moving, it becomes even more important to create the opportunities for people to engage, whether it's online learning, whether it's coaching, whether it's mentoring. And again, we've got a large number of people that are moving into the business world right now, whether you call them Gen Y, Gen Z, or millennials, that aggressively want a voice. And I think that the organizations have an obligation to do that. The other piece that Craig was mentioning earlier that I really appreciated was that sometimes you have people in organizations, if you run a 9-box exercise, for example, that a lot of organizations don't realize that if you have people that are okay being in the bottom right part of that box, which is people that are effective at what they do but don't necessarily want to move, that we create conditions where it's okay for them and we don't make them feel poorly or that they're not engaged or motivated. And I think there's a lot of opportunity where we can do work to focus and engage people.
I appreciate the insight there. Rachel, please go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there.
Sure. Well, please, I would just add to that keeping in touch with industries and how they're changing and understanding what's happening so that you can stay ahead of things and not just skilling your teams for what they're working on, but also for future opportunities is really important. And sometimes it'll just come down to letting your innovative teams identify what courses they think are important that they'd like to be taking and giving them that time, and in some cases offering them tuition reimbursement to be able to participate in that and time to do it is essential to upskill your team?
I would say, frankly, just invest back what you're saying, right? So if you're saying, look, we're fans of empowering and whatnot, then back it. Put that investment in financially to each of those employees so that they can, whether they're blue collar or white collar, that they have whatever those opportunities that are seeking. What I tend to find is that people are smart, and there's one thing of like, yeah, we can do this, and we empower you, and you're going to be able to take whatever you want, and blah blah blah. And then when it comes down to it, oh no, I'm sorry, we can't do that. And so it's backing what you're saying, because if you start saying things and then you back away from it, employees will talk to other employees, and then nobody will believe you anymore. And it just becomes a cycle of, for some people, this, sort of a depressed experience of, God, I got to go to work today. You don't want that. You want somebody comes in there is like, this is a great place to work. I get to do this. So, they're going to have, they have a volunteer program to help out here, and I'm a big fan of that, and all these other things. That's the employee you want. A happy employee obviously has better productivity than a miserable employee. And this is something that is the best way of doing that, is just truly investing in them and saying, what are you, interested in and doing, and allow them to respond back. And sometimes it requires you to, the old adage of pulling teeth, because people will go, I don't know. Even though they actually do know, they're afraid to say, because they're expecting rejection automatically.
Well, folks, that's really brought us to the end of our hour. And there are other questions, and I apologize to you all and to our listeners and viewers that we don't have time to address them in this hour. But again, I invite you to submit online, and we will pass those along. Everyone, I just want to remind you, while you're here online with us, if you're looking for credits, you can access them at hci.org. Go to My HCI dashboard, learning, and then if you need to, go ahead and download your transcript by selecting that option. I just want to say one more thank you to our presenters today, and to the people at Cornerstone. And I'd also like to thank you, our webcast viewers. Thanks for spending another hour with us. We'll see you next time.